Hi, I'm glad you're here to bake with me today. I've been teaching bread baking for 20 years, but never online, so we're going to bake history together. Who's ready to bake? This type of bread that we're going to make today is one that you make the dough, let it rise, and then shape it, let it rise again, and then bake it. If you're a beginning baker or you've baked unsuccessfully before, I hope I'm going to be able to answer your questions by baking along with you today and letting you know some things that can go wrong and how you can fix them or avoid them. So let's get started with the equipment and ingredients that you need to have today. Okay, our bread baking that we're going to do today, like most typical breads, will only involve about 35 minutes of working time, but you're going to be doing it over a process of about 3¼ to 3½ hours. The equipment that you need are a bowl for mixing and a larger bowl or pot for rising it. If you have a whisk, that's great. A scraper's helpful, and a wooden spoon or some kind of spoon to stir. That's the equipment. Now our ingredients. We need about 6 cups of flour. I'm going to be using today 2 cups of whole wheat and about 4 cups of unbleached all-purpose. You can make yours with all-purpose if you want. A 1/2 cup, which is a 1/2 stick of butter melted. I like sweet unsalted. Use what you have. If you don't have butter or you prefer to use oil, you can use canola oil. Again, a 1/2 cup. 1/2 cup of sugar. This is more than most recipes. We'll talk about that later. Some extra flour in a cup for kneading and shaping later. 2 eggs for the recipe now, 1 for glazing later. A rounded tablespoon of salt. 2 packets of baking yeast, or if you buy it in bulk, less than 2 tablespoons of baking yeast. And 1 3/4 cups of water. Let's get started. Yeast. You want less than 2 tablespoons of baking yeast. You can use baking yeast or instant yeast, which means it's instantly dissolving. Do not use rapid rise. It's a different strain of yeast, and don't use nutritional yeast because it won't do anything. We're going to add our sugar, which feeds the yeast and also gives flavor to the bread, 1/2 cup. Most recipes for this size will just call for about a tablespoon. This is a little bit of a sweeter flavor, not as sweet as a breakfast bread. And then the other most essential ingredient to baking besides yeast is your liquid temperature. We're using 1 3/4 cups of water. You want to stick your finger in, and it should be so hot that you pull your finger out quickly, but not so hot that you burn yourself. While our yeast is proofing, and I'm just giving it a little stir, proofing means you want to prove that your yeast is good. If your yeast doesn't start to proof, start to work, you might as well throw it out because your bread's not going to do anything. So see how the yeast has changed? It's gotten a very creamy look. This is proving that it's effective and we're ready to move on. Okay, at this point, we're going to add our melted butter. This is a 1/2 stick. If you're using oil, a 1/2 cup of oil. And we're going to put almost all of the butter in, except about a tablespoon. And that, we're going to take our bowl that we're going to rise the dough in and just turn this upside down. The container that we melted it in, I melted it in the microwave. It's just gonna save us a step later on. Okay, the butter's been added. Now we're going to add our 2 eggs. I have farm eggs, that's why they're different colors. Green, brown. The yolks are really golden on these. All right, I like the whisk at first because it mixes these ingredients a little bit more easily. The eggs make it richer, it's not required. Again, we use 2 eggs. We're saving an extra egg a third egg for later for the glaze. Flour, do not use self-rising flour. Other than that, you can use whatever flour you have available. I'm choosing to make this bread with a little more whole wheat. I'm gonna do 2 cups of whole wheat, and I'm going to do up to 4 cups, the rest, I should say, in unbleached all-purpose. I have made this all white whole wheat, which is a different strain of whole wheat. It's a newer one. You can find that usually in the grocery, and I really like it that way. If you're making yours with unbleached all-purpose, it's just gonna be so much lighter than this, so don't worry that your bread dough looks different than mine. If you're making it with whole wheat, I recommend you start with whole wheat because whole wheat has more fiber, it absorbs more liquid, and ultimately you will use less flour overall. Start with your whole wheat. If you're using unbleached all-purpose, then add a couple of cups and whisk it. At that point, we're going to switch from the whisk to a spoon, or perhaps you've been using a spoon all along. That's okay. We just want to get things nicely mixed, and it's starting to get thick. Now there's a difference in all-purpose flour. There's unbleached all-purpose, which is preferable for baking. The bleached version, again, the bleach could negatively impact your yeast growth, but if that's all you have, you can make bread with it. Now, we added the 2 cups all at once. Now we're gonna slow it down. We're gonna only add about a cup at a time, and then we're gonna slow it further. We'll get that stirred in. Now there's other kinds of flour you can bake with. There's bread flour. Bread flour is milled for machine use. Think your KitchenAid mixer. But it'll still be fine if that's what you have today to use. You just don't want to use cake flour or pastry flour, whether it's white or whole wheat. Okay, I'm still adding it by the cup or less. So at this point, we have about 2 cups of whole wheat and 2 cups of white, half and half. Again, we want to add the flour gradually. You can see it's starting to get thicker. All right, I'm gonna slow it down to about a half a cup at a time. The rule of thumb is you can always add, but you can't take it away. So, the one thing we haven't added, and I've almost forgot, is the salt. Salt is great for bread in giving it flavor, but it also controls the growth of the yeast. Now, I would have added the salt typically right after I added the whole wheat flour. Because salt controls the growth of the yeast, you don't want it in right away to kill the yeast before you even get started. I was so excited about baking bread with you today, I forgot to add it. So there we go, it's in and it's fine. And that shows me that if you've forgotten at this point to put in an ingredient, it's okay, add it. Let's say you're like a friend of mine who called and said, I made the dough and I forgot to put the yeast in. Well, you can still bake at that another half cup in, and it's getting really thick and clumped together. So what I told her and what she did was she took her clump of dough that she had already made, she kneaded the bread, and then she added the yeast, diluting it, reconstituting it from its dried state into a liquid. She kneaded it in and started as if she hadn't made a mistake at all, and it was fine. You just don't want to let it rise then quite as long. All right, this is really clumping together. So at this point, we've used a total of 5 cups of flour. I'm gonna put some on the counter because we're gonna start the process of kneading. Kneading helps to develop the structure of the bread. You can see how much flour I've put on the counter with my little artwork. All right, we're gonna get all this in, and we're gonna use our scraper to get this dough off. All right, kneading is a process of developing the structure of the bread, the gluten, and making sure we have enough flour in it. Because if you stuck your fingers in it right now, there's a lot of flour on the outside that feels kind of dryish, but inside it's still very wet. So kneading, we're folding, turning, lifting it, and pressing it down in a folding manner. You're not using your fingernails, you're using your fingertips and your palms to lift, turn, and fold. Now, we keep rotating that. Turn, lift, fold. Turn, lift, fold. Turn, lift, fold. It's very rhythmic. Now, as you're kneading, you may notice some little pieces of dough. Throw those out. We want to keep flour under it, but not little extra pieces because they are now at a different moisture content than the rest of the dough, and so we don't want that. Now, what else can go wrong with your bread? At this point is when you can correct it. Maybe you don't have enough flour. Maybe there's not enough mass in your bread. Well, the texture won't be as nice. It's like cookies. If you don't put enough flour in it, they spread kind of thin. All right. Let's just drop this clump down. See, it's kind of spreading out, but it's staying fairly together. It's looking pretty good. But when I stick my fingers in, I feel real wet spots where it's sticking to your finger. So again, we keep a little flour under, not as much. And I'm continuing to knead. Let's say you forgot an ingredient. Oh, I forgot the eggs, forgot the butter. Well, if you really want it at this point, work it in there. You'll have to add more flour. It'll be kind of messy, but you'll still end up okay. Or forget it. The salt's kind of essential. Sprinkle it on if you've forgotten it and knead it in. And know it'll taste better than without it, but the texture's going to be a little bit off. All right, let's check this again. Now, I'm feeling some spots that are wetter than others, so we want a little more flour. We're making sure we don't put these little clumps that got away in. Again, they're at a different level of moisture. All right. A lot of people ask, can I knead the bread too long? Well, to that I say, how much of a workout do you want? This is a good upper body workout. Forget bicep curls this morning and tricep push-ups. I'm working it. Now, let's check our dough again. Feeling better, still feeling some wet spots. So, if you need a little more flour, take it from your batch or from your little extra bowl that you set aside. The moisture is really dependent on how well you measured, how large your eggs were, how well you measured your water, how large your eggs were, the liquid content of that. How humid is it out today? It's going to absorb moisture in the air. All right, let's feel it. Feeling good. Feeling evenly moist. It should feel like a super sticky Post-it note when you're done. If you press in, you can feel that stickiness and then you pull away. This was on my finger from before. And it doesn't stick to your finger. So, It's absorbed most of the flour that we have here, so it looks nice and smooth. When I dump it down, it's staying together. It's got good mass. If yours kind of spreads around, you're gonna need some more flour. And then the way that you really check to see if it has kneaded enough is press 2 fingers in it. See how it's spraying back like that? That means it has kneaded. So first, I'm gonna take this bowl. Remember I turned the butter over? It's been sitting a while and so it's kind of cooled off. But we've got our butter in the bottom of the bowl. We take our dough like it's a rag and we're gonna swirl it around the bowl. Give that dough a swirly. Flip it over. We're gonna cover it with a dish towel and let it rest for an hour. If you're called into work or something comes up with the kids and you're not gonna be able to do anything with this dough, put it in the refrigerator and just forget it until later. You'll take it out and let it come to room temperature for a couple of hours before you're ready to proceed. But so all your work won't have been for naught. Now, rising it. I'm just gonna rise it on the kitchen counter. You don't need a warming drawer. You don't need to put it in the oven at a low temperature. I rise it in my kitchen in winter and it's set at a normal temperature in the house. It will rise. Bread that is sourdough bread that has the longer, slower process, that rises in the refrigerator. So don't worry about feeling like you have to rise it in a warm environment. Now, prior to 1 hour from now, you need to get the pans out that you want to use to bake in. Are you going to make rolls and need a couple of baking sheets? This amount will make about 36 dinner rolls. If you want to make a combination of dinner rolls and burger-sized buns, maybe about 2 dozen. So you'll need a couple of pans. Maybe you want to make a loaf pan. So just get those out. If you have parchment, that's very helpful. Get the parchment paper out. If you don't have parchment, you'll use spray oil if you have that, or brush oil on a pan. If you have some really old baking sheets that are kind of thin and burnt on, you might want to line them with aluminum foil, shiny side up if you have that. Really, parchment is best, but I understand that not everyone has everything at home, especially that first time when they're baking. Those really thin old pans, the bottom of your pans might burn the bottom of your bread. And one thing before we go, smell that dough. It should smell like good yeasty dough. Remember that, because we're gonna smell it again. See you in about 55 minutes. Let's check on our dough. An hour has passed. It looks great. It's risen up, it's doubled in size. Now what happens when we press on it? The dough deflates and it stays imprinted. That's how you know that it has risen enough. So we're going to put some flour on the counter, very light, not as much as when we did before. Dump our flour out, our dough. Oh, look at that. Lots of air bubbles in there. Listen, you can hear kind of a little whoosh as the air is coming out. We want to get those air bubbles out. The yeast has been growing and eating the flour and the sugar, and it has little air bubbles, just like you might burp. So we're going to prepare to shape our bread. Hopefully you've gotten your pans ready. We talked about that. I'm using parchment covered baking sheets. If you are going to do a loaf pan, would spray oil it first. And this will make about 2 loaves. I'm just going to give you an air loaf. You're going to show that you would roll it over, press the sides down, put it in your pan and press it flat. And again, this would make 2 loaves. But I'm going to show you how to braid it today and how to make a couple of different kinds of rolls and knots. Let's start with this. You've got a strip that's about 4 to 5 inches long, 1/2 inch deep, inch wide, And we're gonna take this rectangular strip and make it into a circle by visualizing a middle point and bringing everything into the middle. This dough feels soft like a baby's behind. That's what you want. Good moist dough. It shouldn't feel dry and floury. So then you can see I'm rolling my hands together just like you would play with Play-Doh. You've got this nice round loaf. I'm gonna make a bigger one, a burger-sized bun. So for that, you need a piece of dough that's about 6 or 7 inches long, 1 inch wide, 1/2 inch thick. And again, you're rolling it around. Now you don't need to do this in the air like I'm doing it now. Do it on the counter. I just want you to be able to see it well. You kind of visualize a center point like a belly button, and you're rolling, pulling all the sides in towards that. And then roll it between your fingers to get it nice and round and symmetrical. You can even push it down a little bit. Now, if your roll feels symmetrical all around, it will come out looking that way. If your roll has kind of a shoulder here or it's a little denser on one side, it'll come out looking like that. It'll still taste great. It just depends on how you want it to look. Onto the sheet it goes. Now we're going to do a bread twist. So I'm gonna start with the same amount of dough as I did for the larger dinner size roll, about 4 to 5 inches, inch wide, 1/2 inch thick, and I'm going to twist it. One hand is twisting clockwise, the other counterclockwise. And I'm twisting it, and let's just look. See all that great boing, boing. That stretchiness, that's the gluten. Your dough's working nicely. Okay, so back to the twisting. So you see I'm twisting, 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 bringing my fingers together, still twisting, and you got this nice bread twist. Now, if you just set this on your pan to rise, it would make a great hot dog bun or a long sandwich bun. Or you can just take it and wrap it around itself, kind of push it under there. You have a nice little bread knot. Now I'm putting these on the pan with enough room between them because they are going to, again, double in size and even increase more so when they get in the oven. Let's do that again. Twist, twist, twist. Counterclockwise hands twisting, fingers twisting and coming together, and you have a rope. Wrap it around, put it on the cookie sheet. Now, if you're having trouble twisting, don't be surprised. It takes a little practice. Sometimes people get it right away, sometimes they don't. The other thing that you can do is roll it, just like you did, let's push this dough out of the way, when you were a kid and you would make snakes. You could just roll it like that and wrap it around itself like a snake, and you have a lovely little roll. So, what you do is up to you. This is the artistic part, the scientific part of the dough making with the yeast, the temperature of the water, the growth of the sugar. That's all scientific. What you decide to do with your bread, that's artistic. All right, so we're going to braid the bread. Now, just like you braid hair, this would be if you wanted a braided loaf. You could just braid it just as it is. Or you could roll each one just like we had rolled them for that last one, like a snake. Or fold it in half because it's kind of long and do the twist. I really like to do this because it keeps its shape better when you go to make a braided loaf. So I'm going to twist this one too. Two strands, and see I'm stretching them out because I want them to be equally long, equally thick. There's the last one. Counterclockwise hands, bringing fingers together, twisting up, stretching it out. Wing, it's like a rubber band. Okay, you have 3 strands. So perhaps one strand's a little longer than the other. Put that one in the middle. And you're going to braid it just like you braid hair. Sort of put them together at one end, right over the center. Then you have a new center, left over the center, new center, right over the center, new center, and so on, just like you would braid hair. Pinch the ends together, pinch the other end together, maybe you braid backwards on that end, and there you have a lovely braided loaf. Now, if you can do another smaller braid and put that on top, and that makes a really nice shaped loaf when it bakes. And if you attach it now while the dough's moist, it serves as a glue and will keep it in place. But the other thing you can do is just cut it into roll-sized pieces, and there you have, and I'm putting them all on the sheet. Now it's important that you don't have little tiny thin rolls next to jumbo size rolls, because these will bake at a different temperature. So try and keep them consistently. Rolls, cover them over with a dish towel, and I'll see you back in about 55 minutes. Most breads take about 2/3 the time on the second rise, this rise after the shaping, but I like this one. It comes out perfectly at just an hour. See you. Okay, I hope you've preheated your oven to 375. We're at the stage where we're going to bake our bread. Paint our bread. Let's look at our rolls. Here's some of those nice twists. The first one we made that was round, bigger round one. If you don't have a pastry brush, use your finger. You do not want to deflate the bread. So you want to very gently and with a light touch with your finger or a pastry brush, paint the bread. Now we're doing this as a glaze. The glaze is optional. If you didn't use a glaze, it would come out fine. If you didn't use a glaze, it might come out a little rustic looking. The glaze gives it a little color, it gives it a little shine, and it lets us put sesame seeds on that will stick to the dough instead of falling off. Just need a little bit of raw sesame seeds or poppy seeds. And again, all of this is for about 8 minutes. Then we're gonna switch racks and put it in for an additional 8 minutes. The bread's been in the oven now about 5 minutes. You can see that it's risen. It's getting really nice and light and fluffy looking. Awesome. It's smelling good. The tops are starting to get lightly browned on the top shelf. Looking good, but not done. The bottoms of these, which are on the bottom of the oven, are going to be more browned. Trust me, I'm not picking them up because they're too hot. So we're switching the racks, and we're going to put them in for another 8 minutes and then check. Let's get these out of the oven. We're going to take the paper and slide it off. If you've done it on foil, just use a spatula or your fingers if you've got Teflon fingers, and take them off the foil. You can leave them on the paper on the cooling rack otherwise. This is how you know that they're done. See the color on the bottom? Listen, it should sound hollow, like a drum. Color on the top. Now, if you used a thermometer, the inside temperature would be 145 degrees Fahrenheit. The yeast continues to grow until it gets to 145, and then the yeast dies, and the crust forms, and you have this beautiful bread. When you're ready to use it, take the rolls out, let them defrost on your counter, put them in the microwave for about 12 to 15 seconds, or you can defrost them and then rewarm them in the oven if you have something else already in the oven. So there's lots of ways to do that, but I highly recommend that you keep the bread frozen, and this way you can take it out and have fresh bread every day and not a gluten fest all at once.